Hey, what's up guys, and welcome to part 2 of my Uniden R8 setup guide video series. In the first video, we talked about what you need to know when you're driving around with the detector, including the detector's interface and the different buttons that you can press while you're out driving with your R8. And in this video, we're going to go over the different settings and menu options available in the detector. We're going to explain what all the different menu options are and basically help you optimize the detector to maximize its performance and cut down on false alerts. Now, for those of you who prefer reading, I also have a companion article over my website that goes over all of the same information. That's going to be a really good resource for you. Additionally, I'm also going to keep that article updated every time Uniden releases a new firmware update and adds new features or changes things, etc. That's going to be the best resource to kind of keep up to date with the latest and greatest settings. For this video, I'm doing it with the latest current firmware available for the R8, which is firmware version 1.25. Again, if you're watching this video at a time when there's a newer firmware update that's available, definitely go take a look at that article on my website. Also, if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll also find my general recommended settings. It's like a good starting point with how to program your R8. Plus, you'll find the list of the settings that I run on my personal R8 as well. You'll also find a link to where you can download these different settings files and load them directly into your detector. Now, when it comes to actually programming your R8, there's two different ways to do it. The first way is to actually go into the detector itself, push the buttons, and go through the menu. That's the way that we're going to do it here for this video so that I can demo a lot of these features. Another way, if you're sitting at home, is you can just take the detector, plug it into your computer, and then when you're running Uniden's update software, you've got the ability to go in and change all the different settings right from your computer. And both of these solutions are going to work great. Now, the last thing to quickly mention is down in the description, I'm also going to have some additional resources for you. Some of the settings that we talk about are going to be location dependent, depending on what radar guns officers use in different parts of the country. So I'm going to have some additional resources for you down there. There's also the Uniden manual that you can check out, which has some good information as well. And then if you need to pick up an R8, I'll have a link to where you can purchase one as well. And so with that said, let's go ahead and dive into everything you need to know about customizing and programming your Uniden R8. All right, so starting off, in order to go in and start changing settings, you're going to want to press the menu button here on the left side of the top of the detector. And then you can press the menu button again if you want to switch and change any of the settings themselves. If you want to start scrolling through the menu to take a look at all the different options, you can just press the plus and minus button. The plus button is going to start scrolling forward through the menu. If you miss an option and you want to go back, you can just press the minus button like this. And then again, the menu button is going to let you change whatever setting you're currently set to. Now, starting at the very beginning of the menu, you're going to see an option here to switch between basic mode and expert mode. Basic mode is just going to allow you to do some simple things like adjust the color of the detector's display or switch between miles per hour and kilometers per hour, things like that. Expert mode is going to unlock all the different settings that are available, which is going to be especially useful when you really want to go in and start customizing your detector. And if you're curious, on that article on my website, I've got a full list of the different settings that are available when you're in basic mode, as well as the additional settings that you're going to get when you switch the detector into expert mode. Now, the next menu option is going to allow us to adjust the detector sensitivity. We've got 4 different sensitivity options. You've got advanced mode, highway mode, city mode, and auto mode. Now, easiest way to start talking about this, let's begin here with highway mode. Now, highway mode is going to run the detector maxed out, full sensitivity on all bands at all times. And then city mode is going to be useful if you're driving around in the city and you want to help cut down some of the false alerts. What city mode is going to do is it's going to heavily reduce the sensitivity of the detector, but just on K-band, where you're going to be seeing a lot of those automatic door openers and whatnot. Most of the falses that you'll get around the city are going to be on city mode, and so this is just designed to help kind of quiet down the detector by reducing the sensitivity on K-band. Obviously, there's going to be some impacts to performance, but if you're driving around in the city, it can be one way to help cut down some of the false alerts. Now, the next menu option is going to be for auto mode. This is essentially going to automatically switch between highway mode and city mode for you. The idea is you're going to set a speed threshold here for auto city, and above this speed, it's going to be running in highway mode. Below the speed, it's running in city mode. And so if you want full sensitivity on the highway, but then reducing K-band sensitivity around town, you can run the detector in auto mode. And then finally, the last option is going to be advanced mode. This is going to give you manual control over the 3 different radar bands. So you've got X-band, K-band, and Ka-band. So if you wanted to, for example, you can start progressively dialing back K-band sensitivity. Instead of dropping it all the way down to like 10% in city mode, you can start dialing it back little by little, all the way down here to 30% in advanced mode. And so this is going to be helpful to start dialing back the sensitivity of different bands regardless of the speed that you're traveling. Now, one thing to note, advanced mode doesn't unlock any other advanced features. It's just giving you independent control of the sensitivity on the 3 different radar bands. Next is going to be the rear balance option, and it's basically going to be reducing the detector sensitivity and thus range of any signals coming from back behind. And so this rear balance option is going to apply to all the different radar bands, including X, K, and Ka. Now, something else to note is the rear balance option is also going to reduce the sensitivity, not from the detector's maximum sensitivity, but whatever it's otherwise set to. So, for example, if you have the detector set to highway mode, full sensitivity all the time, in rear balance set to, let's say, 50%, that's going to give you 100% sensitivity in the front, but 50% sensitivity in the rear for X, K, and Ka. Now, let's say you then go into advanced mode, and you drop K-band sensitivity from 100 down to 70%. Well, in that situation, K-band is going to give you 70% sensitivity in the front, but then rear balance is going to give you half of that if you set it to 50%. So your rear sensitivity is going to drop to now 35%, which is half of 70%. So again, this rear balance option, it's going to be in addition to whatever other kind of sensitivity options that you've got the detector set to. Now, the next menu option is going to be for your GPS functionality. Personally, I like to leave this turned on so that I can use features like low-speed muting or GPS lockouts or get my red light camera alerts, for example. But if you want to turn all that stuff off, you can do that in the detector. Next, we've got the option here for your speed camera alerts. You can turn them on and off as you like. And basically, this is going to get you notifications to any speed cameras that are built into the detector's GPS database. Now, this is different from getting alerted to different photo radar systems like the MultaRadar or the Gatso. This is going to be a GPS-based alert system, so it's going to be alerting you regardless of if the speed camera is on or not. So let's say you're driving through a school zone or something. Obviously, slow down in school zones, don't speed there, that kind of stuff. But this is going to be alerting you when you're driving through a school zone, let's say, that has a speed camera, regardless of if it's a weekday and kids are at school or if it's the weekend or the middle of the night. So again, this is a GPS-based feature, and you get the latest updates for this GPS database by going to Uniden's website. They have a database file that you can download to your detector, and it gives you kind of the latest red light camera and speed camera database right into your detector. Now, you're also going to have the ability to adjust how far away you get alerted to these different speed cameras. So you can do 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 2,500, 3,000 feet, or there's going to be an auto mode. Now, auto mode is going to vary how far away you get alerted to these speed cameras depending on how fast the speed limit is of the road that you're on. So if you're driving on a road with a really high speed limit, it's going to be giving you a longer alert distance. But if you're traveling on a road with a really low speed limit, it's going to wait till you're closer to the speed camera before it begins alerting. Similarly, we've got the option to turn on or off your different alerts to your red light cameras that you'll encounter at different intersections. Now, something to note with Uniden's implementation of red light camera alerts, it's going to alert you regardless of what direction that red light camera is enforcing. So if there's a red light camera at the intersection, you're going to get notified, even if maybe you're driving this direction, but the red light camera is only enforcing traffic in that direction. So just something to note about Uniden's implementation of the red light camera alerts. Now, the next feature is a really useful feature. It's going to be called Red Light Camera Quiet Ride. And this is going to be basically helping you mute out any red light cameras that you may pick up or the detector could alert to when you're driving on the highway and you don't actually want to get alerted to red light cameras. Now, the reason this is very useful is there's going to be times when you're driving down the highway, but there's a nearby surface street which has a red light camera on it, and the detector doesn't know if you're on the highway or on the city streets, and so it's going to alert you to a red light camera that's ahead of you, even though it's not actually on the road that you're on. And so for that reason, it's basically going to give you the ability to not get alerted to any red light cameras when you're traveling above a preset speed. So you can think of this as kind of like high-speed muting to effectively mute red light camera alerts when you're driving on the highway. Next is going to be your POI Passchime. You can basically turn on or off audible notifications letting you know when you pass a speed camera or a red light camera. Personally, I like to have this feature turned off. Some of the lower-end unit detectors don't actually have this menu option, and they're always going to give you the chime. I know some people find this annoying because they're like, hey, I don't need the notification every time I pass a speed camera, let's say. But with the R8, you do have the ability to actually turn off that chime that goes off every time you pass a red light camera or a speed camera. Next is going to be your voice menu option. Voice on. Now, this is going to do two different things. Now, the main benefit of turning on the voice feature is to get some additional information whenever you get a radar alert. For example, rear Ka band. So you heard the detector say both Ka band and that it was a rear signal. That can be useful, especially when you're learning the detector and you're not sure what all the different beeps sound like. It just lets you know that, hey, that was Ka band. That can also tell you the direction of the signal, if it's in the front, side, or back behind. Now, the second thing it's going to do is kind of speak some of the different menu options. Expert menu, basic menu. I do sometimes like to turn this off when I'm going through a lot of my settings. Expert. Because you get beeps like that, and it also kind of slows down your ability to go through a, well, pretty long menu with a bunch of different menu options. And so a lot of times I'll actually turn this off, and then it makes it way easier for me to just quickly run through the detector's menu like this. And so if you want the detector to actually speak the direction and the band of the different radar signals, you can turn the voice feature on. And speaking of voice, there's also a second voice feature,
KA frequency, voice on,
which is going to speak not only the band and the direction, but also the frequency of different KA band signals.
rear, KA band, 34, 6, 7, 8.
And so with that feature turned on, you could hear it actually say 34, 6, 7, 8, kind of speaking the exact frequency of that radar signal. That's a feature that I find very useful. Not everybody needs it. I've got a video that kind of explains different frequencies of different radar signals and how to understand them. But if you want to know the frequency for Ka band alerts, it doesn't speak like X and K band, you can turn this feature on in the detector. Something else to note is that feature still works even if you have the voice turned off like this, and you've got Ka frequency voice turned on. You're still going to get just the frequency announcements.
34, 6, 7, 8.
In that situation, it announced the frequency, but it didn't say Ka band and it didn't say the direction. So kind of two different controls here for announcing voice information while you're driving. Next, we've got the ability to turn different radar bands on and off. So you've got X band, K band, and Ka band. So first, starting with X-band. X-band is going to be phased out of most of the country at this point. There is still some X-band that's in use in Ohio and in southern New Jersey, as well as a couple rural places here and there throughout the country. But for the most part, you can safely turn off X-band and not have to deal with false alerts on X-band like what you'll see from some automatic door openers. K-band, on the other hand, is still in use through most of the country. There are a couple places here and there, it's pretty rare, where you can safely turn off K-band. But again, for most people in the United States, you are going to want to run with K-band turned on. On K-band, you're going to see not only police officers, but you'll also see speed signs on the side of the road, automatic door openers, blind spot falses coming out of other cars. And so there's a lot of different sources of radar on K-band, which is where a lot of the other kind of filtering options built into the detector are going to come into play. And then finally, Ka-band. While you do have the ability to turn it off, I would definitely recommend leaving this turned on because Ka-band is very actively used throughout the entire country. Something else to note is that once we get into the Ka band segmentation options here a little bit later in the video, you do need to make sure that you have Ka band turned on. With escort detectors, it's a little different. You want to turn off Ka band to use the Ka band segmentation. But with the Uniden detectors, you want to make sure the Ka band is turned on, even if you're using Ka band segmentation. Next, we've got the ability to get notified to different laser alerts. You can turn it on or off as you like. Traditionally, Unidens have pretty poor sensitivity, definitely below average when it comes to detecting laser in the first place. Now, that said, laser detection in a radar detector isn't super useful or reliable in terms of actually getting protected from laser. That's where Waze and laser jammers come into play. But you do have the ability to actually detect, hopefully, if an officer shoots you with laser while you're driving down the road. Speaking of which, there's also a cool new feature here that's now available in the R8. And that is the laser gun ID option. This is effectively going to identify which laser gun the officer is using when they're targeting you. And just to demo that real quick, here's a custom Pro Laser 4. Let's go ahead and shoot the R8 and see how it alerts. All right, go ahead and mute that real quick. And so as you can see, it's alerting to not only laser, but it's also telling you that it's a custom brand gun. And something I've noticed here with the Uniden detectors is that sometimes it'll actually tell you the manufacturer of the gun. Sometimes it'll tell you the specific model of the gun, depending on the pulse pattern and what it can identify with the gun. But either way, it's going to tell you basically what gun the officer is using when the detector picks up laser. Next, we've got the option here to enable K-band pop detection, and specifically for 67 millisecond K-band pop, not 16 millisecond K-band pop. This is a feature that's available in certain MPH brand guns, but it's not really anything that you'll see in practice. And so realistically, you can just turn this feature off and not really worry about it. Next, we've got the ability to detect MultaRadar photo radar systems. You can turn the feature on and off, and this detector is designed to detect both the MRCD as well as the newer MRCT. And the MultaRadar photo radar systems, they're in use throughout North America. We see them a lot more in Canada, but they're also in use in several places here in the United States. There's actually a thread on the forum that kind of compiles a list of where different people have been reporting MultaRadar in use. So you can definitely check that out. I'll link to it down in the video description for you. And so if you have MultaRadar in use in your area, you can go ahead and turn the feature on so the detector can alert to it. That said, you are also going to get some false alerts to MultaRadar as well. just like with K-band, not every source of K-band is like actually a police officer, right? And there are some sources of false alerts that you'll get with MultaRadar. And so if it's not in use in your area, maybe a better idea to leave it turned off. That said, one kind of interesting thing that we've discovered with Uniden detectors is that turning it on, for whatever reason, seems to help reduce the false alerts that you'll get to Mazda CX-5 SUVs. And so kind of one trick people would experiment with is actually turning on MultaRadar detection to help cut down on some of the false alerts that you'll get from CX-5s. That said, that will then introduce some additional false alerts to MultaRadar, so you're then going to have to rely on some of the other features like MRCD lockouts or MRCD low-speed muting to help deal with the false alerts that are introduced from turning the feature on. And so all this kind of stuff is going to be kind of a balance here. And finally, one quick thing to note is the detector is always going to alert to MRCD, regardless of if it's MRCD or MRCT that it's picking up. Next, the detector is designed to detect both the Gatso RT3 and RT4 photoradar systems. Now that said, turning it on is going to lead to quite a few false alerts. I actually find more false alerts to Gatso than MultaRadar, and so if it's not in use in your area, definitely leave it turned off. There's, again, a thread you can reference on the forum where people are reporting where the Gatso systems are in use. That said, in testing, the Uniden detectors don't do a very good job of alerting to these different Gatso systems, both in North America as well as internationally. I've seen some reports of it working well, but for the most part, it doesn't seem like these Attaway detectors actually currently do a good job with Gatso systems. So just something to note there too. Next, we've got the ability for the detector to also alert to Ka-band pop. This is also a 67 millisecond Ka-band pop, and you can turn the feature on or off. And when it comes to pop, again, this isn't something that you're really going to be seeing in practice, and for most people, it's just best, the simple answer is just leave it turned off, and you don't have to worry about some of the false alerts that you may experience with Ka-band pop turned on. Next, we've got the K-band filter. This is going to be super useful to help knock out some false alerts like blind spot falses. You can turn it off if you like, especially maybe internationally or something. But here in North America, definitely leave it turned on to really help cut down on a lot of the false alerts that you'll experience. Next, we've got the Ka-band filter. This is designed to help filter out some false alerts on Ka-band. You can turn it on if you like. There is going to be a little bit of a hit to performance. So personally, I like to keep it turned off because I don't really get a ton of falses on Ka-band. That said, I have heard other people report some falses on Ka. You can try turning on the Ka filter if that applies to you. It doesn't knock out every source of false alert, but it is an option that you've got in your tool belt in case you do experience some false alerts on Ka-band. There's also some other options like Ka-band segmentation, which we'll get into here in just a second too. Next, we have TSF, or the traffic sensor filter. It's a simple filter you can turn on or off. And the traffic sensor filter, it's designed to filter out, well, traffic sensors on the side of the highway that transmit K-band. And so if you're driving in an area with these traffic sensors, you'll notice it because as you're driving down the highway, you'll get these periodic alerts to K-band that are not blind spot falses of a car in front of you, but just the detector keeps periodically alerting, maybe every mile or two, to K-band. And so if that happens to you, you can turn on the traffic sensor filter to basically filter out these periodic bursts of K-band from the traffic sensors. Now, if they're not in use in your area, you could maybe consider turning that off, especially if there's a lot of K-band, like legitimate K-band, because there is going to be a bit of a hit to performance if you turn TSF on. So for maximum performance, you can leave it turned off. If you have traffic sensors in your area, you can turn it on. You can also consider turning it on to help kind of cut down on some of the false alerts from blind spot falses. There's some blind spot systems that have kind of similar pulse patterns, and so you can turn on TSF to help reduce false alerts from not only traffic sensors, but also some blind spot falses too. And speaking of blind spot falses, you've also got two different K-block options, and these are designed specifically to help address some of the common frequency alerts that you'll see from blind spot radar being emitted from other cars nearby on the road. The first one is going to be for 24.199 frequency signals. And signals in this frequency range you'll commonly see from cars like Hondas and Acuras and Chrysler Pacificas. And then the second K-block range, around 24.168-ish, that's a frequency range that you'll see from Hondas, Acuras, GMCs, Jeeps, Chryslers, Cadillacs, etc. And when it comes to filtering out some of these different radar signals, there's 4 different ways that you can approach kind of knocking out some of these blind spot falses. Now, the first way is just to simply block all signals within this frequency range, visibly and audibly. This can be kind of risky because if a police officer is transmitting in this frequency range, the detector is going to block it altogether. But if you just want to fully nuke all signals in this range, you can do it here. Now, if you want to consider something maybe a little bit less aggressive, there's also the K-block weak option. This is basically going to filter out any weak signals in this frequency range. This I actually find to be pretty effective to filter out a lot of blind spot falses because they're kind of weaker radar than like police radar. And I do find that it works pretty well in practice. So like as you're getting closer to a car with blind spot around this frequency range, the detector seems to do a pretty good job of filtering them out while still alerting you to maybe a police radar up the road that's going to have a stronger radar transmission. Something to note, though, is because you're filtering out weak signals, real or false, it's going to be reducing the effective range of your detector being able to alert to legitimate police radar in this frequency as well. It's going to have to wait until that signal gets stronger and you get closer to the source before the detector begins alerting. So that's kind of the trade-offs here of how the K-block weak option works. Next, you have the ability to simply mute all signals in this frequency range regardless of signal strength. So real or false, all the signals here are going to be muted. This can be a nice way to keep the detector extra quiet if you have a lot of false alerts in this frequency range. Maybe weak doesn't do the trick for you. You can just use mute. In this situation, you'll want to just kind of visually keep an eye on the detector because it will still show you these different signals visually, but it's just going to audibly mute the radar alert regardless of signal strength. So if you want an extra quiet detector for yourself or for passengers in the car, you can try the mute option. And then finally, if you want, you can just turn off the K-block feature altogether. Personally, I like running weak typically, but if you find that that's not effective for you, you can maybe try switching over to mute instead. Next, we've got the ability to adjust the frequency range that the detector is going to scan for on K-band. We've got K-band wide, K-band narrow, and K-band extended. Now, K-band wide is going to be designed to scan the typical ranges that you'll see here for police radar in North America. K-band narrow is going to kind of cut off the upper and lower ends of K-band to kind of focus in more on the center frequencies that you'll see on K-band. If you don't have a lot of legitimate K-band in your area, this can be a way to actually cut down some of the false alerts by just cutting out kind of the higher and lower end of K-band and just focusing the detector in on kind of the center frequency range. And then finally, K-band extended is designed if you've got a lot of photo radar in use in your area because it's going to drop you all the way down to 23.9. And because a lot of photo radar systems can actually transmit under 24.050 all the way down to 23.9-ish or so, you can actually turn on the K extended option just to ensure that your detector is able to alert to those systems as well. This could apply to systems like the MultaRadar, the Redflex, etc. Next, we've got similar options available here for KA band. We've got KA narrow, KA wide, and then KA segmentation. Now, in KA wide, the detector is designed to scan all of the different frequency ranges that officers could potentially use here in the United States. On KA narrow, on the other hand, it's going to focus the detector into just scanning around the frequency ranges that guns are actually designed to transmit on. It's effectively designed to segment your detector for segments 2, 5, and 8, just scanning for 33.8, 34.7, and 35.5. It's going to be scanning plus minus 100 megahertz or so for these different frequency ranges, though a little bit higher for the 34.7 frequency range, just because stalker guns tend to drift a little bit lower and higher in their different frequency range that they can transmit on. That said, I think these frequency ranges are still a little bit too tight, and so you may actually want to consider giving yourself a little bit more control over exactly where the detector is going to be scanning for. One of the main reasons why you would actually want to kind of cut down where the detector is scanning in the first place is that with unit detectors, we do see a little bit of a performance improvement when the detector is not wasting time scanning unnecessary frequency ranges where officers aren't even transmitting on the first place. So one of the main benefits is going to just give you improved performance, improved responsiveness and range when you start reducing the range of frequencies that a detector scans for. Now, that said, this can be an advanced feature because if you turn off this frequency range where officers are actually transmitting radar in your area, well, your detector is not going to alert at all. So once we start getting into KA-band segmentation, again, this is an advanced option. There are actually resources that we've got on the forum where people are reporting which segments and kind of which frequency ranges are in use in different states. So you can check that out as well. I'm going to link to that down in the video description too. And the idea here is when you set the detector to KA-band segmentation, it's going to unlock 9 different segments that you can individually turn on and off like this so that you can control exactly where the detector does and does not sweep. Now, personally, my standard recommendation is going to be having segment 2 on, and then segments 4, 5, and 6, as well as segment 8. Now, the detector can go all the way up to segment 9, scanning to 35.7, and then it stops. There's no segment 10 here, so it goes all the way up to segment 9. And this configuration with 2, 4, 5, 6, and 8, I think is kind of the ideal optimal place to actually configure your detector to really scan for 2, 5, and 8, plus giving you kind of a wider frequency range around that segment 5, those 34.7 stalker guns. The stalker guns, for whatever reason, tend to kind of transmit higher and lower, kind of outside the frequency ranges that they're designed to transmit. So having those 2 extra segments for 4 and 6 around 5 can just help to ensure the detector is still going to alert to those different guns if they're in use in your area. They're really common in New York, for example, and other places in the United States. Now, as far as all these recommended settings, again, I cover them on my article on my website, General Recommended Settings. You'll see the recommendation down there for 2, 4, 5, 6, and 8. Plus, of course, you can reference the thread on the forum where people are reporting what segments are needed for different parts of the country. Next, we're going to have some menu options here to adjust the priority of what happens when you've got multiple signals present. How does the detector actually prioritize what's going to be the primary signal and what are going to be your additional signals? Now, something to note, you'll actually see a MRCD here listed as an option. That's only going to show up if you have MRCD turned on. If you have MRCD turned off like this, it's going to look a little different. In that case, you're only going to see KA priority or signal priority. And in signal priority, it's going to prioritize whatever the strongest signal is, regardless of band. On the other hand, KA priority is going to prioritize KA band alerts, even if they're weaker than something like K or X band alerts. Now, what's the thought process behind this and which one should you use? Well, I like to run KA priority because I have a lot of KA band in my area and I have very little legitimate K band. And so if I'm, let's say, encountering a speed sign that's right in front of me, that's going to be a really strong signal, but there's a weaker KA band alert in the distance, I want to prioritize that KA band alert because to me, that's much more likely to be a legitimate alert. So even if I'm by a shopping center with door openers or by speed signs, I still really want to know that there's a KA band signal farther away. That to me is much more likely to be legitimate. That said, if you drive in an area where there's maybe a lot of K-band that's in use, you'll want to know if there's K-band that's really close to you. It's a strong signal, right? You're getting a really strong alert. You can say, that's cool, there's another Ka-band alert farther down the road, but there's K-band right in front of me. I really want to know. If that's the case, you're going to want to run the detector in signal priority mode to prioritize whatever the strongest signal is, regardless of band. Next, let's go ahead and turn MRCD back on here real quick. And then if you do that, you're going to see some different options available here in the setting. You're going to see KA/MRCD, and you're going to see MRCD/KA priority. And then the third option is going to drop you back to a signal priority. But let's go ahead and talk about kind of how these two menu options work. With these two menu options, you're basically going to be prioritizing either KA band or MRCD. Now, if you've got MRCD in your area, probably MRCD/KA band priority would be the way to go because you're going to want to know immediately if MRCD is in use in your area. That's a pretty short range, close range photo radar system, so you really want to get that notification even if there's KA band farther on down the road. However, if you don't have MRCD in your area and maybe you're turning it on to get like that Mazda CX-5 filtering, like I mentioned before, MRCD, it's probably going to be a false if you get that alert. And so in that situation, you're going to want to prioritize KA band alerts. And so in that situation, you'd set the detector to KA/MRCD priority to, again, really prioritize those KA band alerts over MRCD. And then finally, if you've got MRCD enabled and you set the detector to signal priority, it's actually going to prioritize MRCD above everything else, regardless of signal strength. Next, we've got some options here for our manual GPS lockouts. By default, they're only going to work for X and K band. But if you want, you can also enable them for KA band and for MRCD, even though it doesn't actually show up here on screen. Now, for most people, you're going to want to leave this set to X and K band. Locking out KA band can be very risky because there's so few sources of false alerts. But if you need to lock out KA or even MRCD alerts, you can do that here in the menu option. And so again, the way that it works is when you get an alert on your detector, you can just double press the mute button like this, and it's going to go ahead and manually lock out that alert. It'll gray out the alert on screen. It's going to alert quietly now, and you'll see the green text mute mem to know that it's manually locked out. Now, by default, it's not going to let you lock out KA band alerts. So if I try to do that, you can see I can keep pressing the mute button, and it just turns it to on and off. It doesn't actually let me lock out that KA band alert. Now, if you live in an area with, say, a KA band speed sign, and you know for a fact that that's a KA band false alert, and you want the ability to go ahead and lock that out, in that case, you can go to this option and go ahead and enable KA band here for your manual GPS lockouts. And in that situation, you can just double press like this, and it's going to go ahead and do mute memory, and now you've manually locked out that KA band alert. Now, again, locking out KA band alerts can be very risky because they're almost always legitimate. In fact, some brands, some manufacturers don't even let you lock out KA band alerts in the first place. But you do have it available here with Uniden detectors. Just be sure that you use it carefully if you use it at all. I sometimes use it actually for MRCD lockouts because I do have some K-band transmitters on certain intersections that can trigger MRCD falses. And so I'll use it actually for MRCD GPS lockouts, but typically just for your manual GPS lockouts. Now, for GPS lockouts in general, you're only going to want to use them for stationary sources of false alerts, like shopping center door openers and speed signs on the side of the road. You don't want to use them for moving sources of false alerts, like a blind spot false, for example. It's designed to filter out signals that are always in the same location, right? It's GPS-based, and that's what your lockouts are for. If you do accidentally lock out a signal or you want to manually unlock a signal or something. I'm just then going to go ahead and double press the button like that. I'll just mute it again. You saw on screen that it gave me the option to actually unlock the signal, and I just did that by double pressing the mute button here. Next, you've also got the ability for the detector to automatically create your GPS lockouts. You can turn it on or off as you like, and as you can see, it's the automatic mute memory or automatic GPS lockouts. In theory, the idea is as you pass a stationary false alert several times, the detector will see that, hey, you keep passing the source every time you come by, and it looks like it's a false alert, so it's going to automatically create that GPS lockout for you. That said, Uniden's current implementation of lockouts isn't great, and a lot of times you can pass a signal over and over and over and over and over, and it will not lock out, even after a month of repeatedly passing that source. And so a lot of times, even if you have auto lockouts enabled, you're going to need to go in and actually manually create your GPS lockouts as you're going through your typical commute. So we're still waiting on Uniden to fix that. Hopefully they finally get to it, but it's actually been an issue, forever. And so hopefully eventually Uniden fixes it, but just a heads up as far as the current implementation of automatic GPS lockouts. And then just like your manual lockouts, you also have control over which frequency alerts the auto lockouts are going to kick in for. By default, it's only going to apply to X-band and K-band, but if you want, you can also have the auto lockouts work for Ka-band and for MRCD. Now, for this option, I would definitely recommend leaving your auto lockouts if you use them set just to X and K. Yes, you can do auto lockouts for Ka and for MRCD, but I would definitely not recommend this option. If I ever need lockouts for these different frequencies, I'll definitely do it manually to ensure that I'm not inadvertently locking out a police officer or anything. And so I just do manual lockouts for Ka or MRCD in the very rare instances that I need it. I don't want to have the detector actually automatically doing any of those lockouts. Next is going to be our option here for the all threat display. And the all threat display is basically going to take this little box here on the left side of the screen and show you any additional signals beyond just the primary signal. So for example, let's say you pick up first a K-band signal like this, and then you pick up a second Ka-band signal. Well, that Ka-band signal, I've got the detector set up to take priority, but that secondary K-band signal is going to show up here on the left side of the screen, and it can show up to 3 additional signals here. You'll notice that it's going to show the direction, the band, and the signal strength here in the all threat display. Next, we've got the option to adjust the detector's overall display color. So we've got red, white, violet, kind of purplish, blue, amber, kind of orangey, green, pink, gray, and then finally back to red. A lot of this just kind of comes down to user preference. I know some people actually like to have the detector's display match whatever the color is of the interior of their car, so you can just set it to whatever you like here. Next, we also have the ability to adjust the detector's arrow color for different bands. So if you want, like for example, I've got X-band set up to give me green arrows, K-band arrows are going to be yellow, and then red here for some photo radar, and then blue for my Ka-band arrows. And then if we demo that, you'll see that the K-band arrow is going to show up here in yellow, while the Ka-band arrow is going to show up in blue. Next, we're also going to have the ability to adjust the colors here for the Ka-band option. By default, it's actually going to be just showing you the signal strength itself. And so right now I've got a full strength signal like this. But you'll notice if I let go of the trigger, as the signal strength starts to drop, the color of those letters start to change as well. Then we go back to K-band. You'll notice it's a solid red, and then let off the trigger. As the signal strength starts to drop, it's going to lighten to match the signal strength meter. And that's what you're going to see if you go into band color, and you've got this option here set to signal. So K-band is set to basically have that K-band display match your signal strength. If you want, you can vary that and have that K-band letter actually match the same color as your arrow, or you can just have it set to a fixed color like this. Next is going to be kind of your idle display. You can display 3 different things at idle. You can have it display the current mode that you're in. And when you do that, you'll see that I'm currently set to advanced mode. If I press and hold the menu button here real quick, that's going to let me quickly change different sensitivity options. So now you can see I'm in highway mode. If I press and hold it again, that's the shortcut to change next to city mode. And then I can do the same thing finally to change the detector to automatic sensitivity mode. Next, I can have the detector display the current time on screen. That can be useful if you want to see not only the current sensitivity mode that you're on, but also the time, essentially having an extra clock in your car. Or you can opt for the scan display option. When you do this, under your current sensitivity mode, you're going to see kind of this Knight Rider-esque animated scanning bar. Additionally, you also have this option here for the scan icon, kind of a beating heart animation. And when you turn that on, you're going to see kind of that blinking heart here on screen as well. Personally, though, I like to keep those animations turned off. That way, if the detector's display does change in any way, even if it's a muted alert, I've got that visual alert in the corner of my eye, and I can see that, hey, something's going on with my detector. If there's some animation going on, I kind of start to tune that out. So I really like to use visual indications and changes as a way to get my alert, or get my attention rather, while driving. Next, we've got the option to display a couple different things on the idle display on the left side of the screen. You can have it display your speed. You can also add the compass for directional information. You can have just the compass itself. You can display the vehicle voltage, or you can have it display your current altitude, which is kind of fun when you're driving through the mountains. Now, something to note, this compass is going to be kind of inaccurate when you first start up your car. Now, before you start driving, you're going to notice that the compass is going to kind of spin and just point in different directions like this. And this is going to happen before the detector has a chance to kind of figure out what direction it's facing. There's not actually a compass in the detector itself to know different magnetic directions. It's basically relying on GPS movement. So as you're driving down the road, it knows like, oh, I'm driving northbound or I'm driving southbound or something. So it actually needs movement to essentially calibrate and determine its direction. So if you first start up your car and you haven't started moving yet, it kind of just spins the compass like this, just to let you know that like, hey, I don't actually have determination yet of what direction you're facing. So just a quick heads up about that. Next, you've got 3 different alert display modes. So alert display mode 1, 2, and 3. And it's basically going to adjust how different alerts show up on screen. Let's first start with alert display number 1. And we'll go ahead and turn down the volume real quick so we can see the stuff without the detector beeping. But basically, this is my preferred option. This is basically going to give you a nice big display showing you the detector's band, frequency, and signal strength right here at the bottom. It's also got a nice really big arrow on screen as well, which I really like to make it really easy to tell the direction of the signal. Now, alert display number 2 is going to move the strength meter up to the top of the screen and do kind of this rainbow effect. I don't like it as much, though, just because the arrows tend to get a little bit smaller, as you can see here. And then finally, alert display number 3 is basically going to give you a split screen like this, where your main signal is going to be showing up at the top, and then if you get an additional signal, it's going to show that information as well. This can be nice if you want to see the frequency of the 2 primary signals, not just the single primary signal. Now, if you get some additional signals, those are going to show up here in the all threat display, so you can get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 signals showing up simultaneously, not just 4 like with the other options. That said, I don't like this one as much just because the arrows are kind of tiny. Plus, when you have only 1 signal present, well, it doesn't use the whole display. It still just leaves it up at the top of the screen like this. And so for that reason, I still prefer display number 1. But obviously, like anything else, that just comes down to user preference. Next, we've got the ability to adjust the detector between displaying things in miles per hour or kilometers per hour. That's also going to adjust things like displaying the number of meters left to a speed camera, or maybe how many feet you have left until you get to a speed camera as well. Next, we're going to have the different alert tone options, so you can actually customize the different tones for different bands. Let's actually go ahead and just run through them here real quick. So as you can hear, there's 12 different alert tones that you've got for, X, K, KA, as well as the different photo radar systems. And you'll see that when you start scrolling through. So there's the X band tone, K band, K bogey, which we'll skip for a second, MRCD tones, Gatso, KA, and laser. Now, there's 2 other options that we've got here in the mix as well. There's the KA bogey tone, as well as the K band bogey tone. And these bogey tone options are basically designed to alert you to the presence of a second signal while the detector is already alerting to 1 signal. So that can be helpful. Let's say you're picking up a KA band alert, but then, hey, there's another officer up the road ahead who's also transmitting on KA. It can give you a new bogey alert tone to like audibly get your attention and say, hey, I know I've been alerting already, but you need to know that there's a second signal, a new signal that's present as well. Personally, I prefer this being used for KA band and not so much for K band. And the reason I say that is because sometimes when you're driving around in shopping centers, there's multiple door openers and multiple K band sources. And so the detector may actually start throwing these new bogey alert tones just to give you like more noise. And I don't like that when I'm driving around in the city. So I'd like to actually have the K band bogey tone turned off, but I do use the KA band bogey tone. But obviously your preference depends on what officers use in your area, And we can go ahead and run through the different alert tones here if you'd like to hear what that's like. Next, we've got our options here for auto mute. You can turn the auto mute option on or off, and you can also manually control how low the detector's volume drops once the auto mute kicks in. So we can go all the way up to volume 7 would be the max out of 9, or you can have it be totally silent when the auto mute kicks in. And the idea here is that the detector is going to alert initially at full volume, and then after it gets your attention, it's going to reduce the detector's volume so you can continue hearing the alerts if you want, but it's not actually screaming full tilt for you. Something I like that's now available now as a safeguard is, let's say you've got your volume level set to 2, but for whatever reason you set the auto volume to like 7 or something. It's not going to initially alert at 2 and then jump to 7. It used to do that, but then they actually fixed that. So you're typically going to have your volume set here, and then you're going to choose an auto volume level that's lower than whatever your typical volume levels are. Next, we've got a rear K-band mute option. You can turn this on if you want to basically mute all K-band signals from behind where they're typically going to be less of a threat. And you'll notice that when you get a rear alert like this, it's going to automatically just display mute on screen. If it switches to a side or a front-facing alert, the detector is going to alert normally. But once maybe you pass the source and it alerts behind you, at that situation, it's going to go ahead and automatically mute for you like that. I know right now for the video, it's a little weird to see the signal bouncing around different directions like that, just because I've got the radar gun here in the car right next to the detector, so it's doing a little weird stuff, but it's useful, so at least you can see that like front and sideways signals, you're going to get alerted, but rear ones, it can mute for you automatically. Next, we've got some options here to control the dark mode display option. You can basically control how bright the detector gets when it alerts. And you can choose different options here, bright, dim, or dimmer, or go back to bright. And the way that works is if we change our display brightness over here to the dark option, at idle, you're going to see the display is pretty much turned off, but there is a little bitty blinking dot at the bottom of the screen. Hopefully you can see it, but it kind of moves from the left to the center to the right. And that's just to let you know that, hey, the detector actually is turned on and it's working. However, when you get an alert, here, we'll just mute it real quick. The detector is going to go ahead and light up and display that like, hey, you've got a signal going on. And that menu option is basically deciding how bright does this display here get when the alert actually pops up. Next, we've got our auto dim setting options. So when you go into here, you're going to see that there's 2 different ways for the automatic display brightness adjustments to function. First, it can either use the ambient light sensor in the detector, or you can actually have it vary based on time. Now, most people are probably going to want to rely on the ambient light sensor, so when it gets brighter in the car, the display gets brighter, and then at night, when it gets darker, the display gets darker. Now, not everybody necessarily wants to use that because, like with every detector, none of these actually have great ambient light sensors, and depending on where you have it mounted, that might actually cause weird things with the detector. So for that reason, you may actually want to rely on the time instead. So in daytime, it automatically gets brighter, and then whenever it thinks nighttime is, based on what you set it to, then it gets darker. And if you want to do that, you're just going to change the mode here to time, and then you can actually go in and adjust what time the display gets bright, and then how bright it gets. And you can also choose what time the display is going to get darker and dim, and also how dim it gets. That said, I personally don't like using this feature because I live at, well, a higher latitude, and so in the summertime, sun sets at like 9 p.m., and in the wintertime, sun sets at like 4 p.m. So constantly throughout the year, I have to keep going in and adjust my sunrise and sunset time. But if you live at lower latitudes where everything's closer to like 6 p.m., 6 a.m. throughout the year, maybe you'd actually want to use the time option. And then, of course, your third option is just to manually control your display brightness, and to do that, you just press and hold the mute/dim button here at idle, and you can just cycle through the different display brightness options like this, which I've covered in the first video. Next, we've got our backlight option, which you can turn on and off, and it's basically just going to enable the backlight behind these 2 buttons here on screen. So if you want kind of a darker detector without the buttons lighting up, you can turn it off, or if you want to be able to see the buttons more easily at night while you're driving, you can turn it on. Now, the next option is going to be quiet ride or your low-speed muting. This is going to be super useful to keep activated around town. I like to run it around maybe 35 to 40 miles an hour or so. And basically the idea here is when you're driving around at low speeds, it's just going to go ahead and mute any X and K band signals for you. And so because right now I'm stationary and obviously below the low speed muting threshold that I just set, if I get any K-band alerts, you're going to see they're going to pop up here on screen like this. You'll see quiet ride displayed on the top right-hand corner of the screen. And then the detector's display is going to flash to let me know that like, hey, a signal is present, but it's currently being muted. However, if I get something like a Ka-band alert, that the detector is actually going to alert to. Here, and we'll just go ahead and mute that again real quick. And so you can see that Ka-band alerts are not going to get muted by quiet ride, but X and K-band alerts will be. Now, something else to note after the quiet ride menu option, there's a specific menu option here for quiet ride just for MRCD and MRCT. And because MultaRadar, photoradar, it's commonly used on city roads, you may actually want to consider turning off MRCD Quiet Ride if you have a lot of MultaRadar in use in your area. But if you're turning it on, let's say maybe to filter out some of those Mazda CX-5 BSM falses, you could turn on Quiet Ride for MultaRadar just to keep the detector extra quiet around town, especially when you're driving through like intersections and city streets and whatnot. Next, you're going to have a menu option here for the Quiet Ride beep volume. And this is basically going to say how loud do you want the detector to initially alert to very briefly before a Quiet Ride kicks in and the detector gets quiet. And so demoing that here real quick, you can hear that the detector alerts initially and then the Quiet Ride kicks in to go ahead and reduce the detector's volume. So that can be super helpful if you have a lot of legitimate K-band in use in your area and you drive on city streets a lot. This way the detector can give you that audible notification of like, hey, there's K-band in use in your area, but I'm going to go ahead and mute it for you. So even if you don't see the blinking, flashing display on screen, you get that extra audible notification that K-band is in use. If you don't have a lot of K-band and maybe you drive around like shopping centers a lot and whatnot, you can just actually set that to 0, so it's going to be totally silent without that initial beep in the first place. And if you do that, then you're just reliant on the visual alerts to see that like, hey, K-band is in use, but you can't hear anything. Next, you're going to have your limit speed option, and this is basically just going to give you a warning if you're traveling above a preset speed. So if you know, for example, like, hey, I'd never want to be traveling faster than 75 miles an hour, and if I do accidentally go faster, give me a notification. If that's the situation, then yeah, it'll warn you when you travel above this speed. You can set it all the way up to, let's see, 100 miles an hour, or you can just turn the feature off altogether. Next, you've got your time zone option, as well as your daylight savings time option. This is basically going to help you set the time on the detector if you have it set up to actually display the time on the face of the detector. Now, the detector doesn't have a clock built in. It's actually determining its time based on GPS satellites. And then you have to go and actually set what time zone you're in so it knows kind of what offset to display on the face of the detector. And so for that reason, if you've got the time set up on the face of the detector, but it's showing the wrong time, be sure that you go in and actually adjust what time zone that you're in so that this can show up properly. And then if you have your time zone set up correctly, but it's off by 1 hour, you can just adjust the daylight savings time option here as needed. Next, you've got a battery warning option that you can set up if you want to get notified if your car drops below 11 volts. Now, that feature sounds useful to maybe let you know if there's an issue with your alternator or something, but I've noticed it can also go off if you have a start-stop system in your car. There's times you pull up at a red light, engine turns off, and your vehicle voltage can actually drop. And so for that reason, you can actually get the battery warning issues at red lights if you have a start-stop system. So if that's the case, you may actually want to consider just turning the feature off. Next, we've got a battery saver option that's designed if you've got the detector plugged into a power source that's always on even when you're parked. Now, ideally, you're going to want to plug your detector into a power source that turns on with your car, and then when you're done driving and you turn the car off, the detector turns off too. That way it doesn't stay on while you're parked and drain your car battery, right? Now, if you've got a car where, let's say a Ford, for example, the cigarette lighter, those are commonly hot even when you're parked, well, your detector is going to stay on even when you're parked. If that's the case, you can turn on this battery saver option, and it's basically just going to turn the detector off after you're parked and stationary for an hour. Additionally, if you're parked in a parking garage and you don't have a GPS lock, right, it doesn't know you're at 0 miles an hour, the same thing is going to happen if it doesn't have a GPS signal for an hour. In that situation, it's going to assume that you're in a parking garage, and after an hour of not having a GPS lock, it will also turn off the detector. Next is the self-test option. This is on by default. Personally, I like to turn it off. I don't find it to be particularly useful. But if we turn it on, here's what that does. When you start your car, you're going to get this visual and audible self-test. Now, something to note is this doesn't actually test the internals of the detector to make sure that it's functioning properly, that it can detect radar, anything like that. It's basically just a demo of the different alerts so you can see what they like. And I guess it also plays sound so you can test to ensure that the speaker is working and that the speaker is maybe turned on. You don't have the detector muted or something, volume set to 0. So it can be useful for that reason, but personally I like to have a silent startup. And so I actually leave the self-test feature turned off, especially because it's not actually testing the internals for any sort of proper functionality or radar detection capabilities. Next, we've got an option here to factory reset the detector and set all the settings back to factory default. Now, Uniden typically recommends doing this every time you update the firmware on the detector, and then you'd have to go in afterwards and actually set your detector's settings back to where they were before, which is kind of annoying. That said, with the new update software that's now available, you actually have the ability now to plug the detector into your computer and download and save all the settings to your computer, and then save that file. Then after you update your detector, you can actually load that file back into the computer and then push those saved settings back to your detector. And so that way you don't afterwards have to go and like manually reprogram your detector settings one by one and then look up settings guide or remember what you had stuff programmed to. It's kind of nice to be able to now save your settings to your computer, update your detector, and then reload those settings back on. So just a quick tip about that. And then as far as our last couple options here, we've got first the ability to clear and delete all of the manual GPS lockouts. We can also delete all of our automatic GPS lockouts too, if we like. Next, we have the ability to delete all of the manual user marks. So if you've pressed this button here to create all of your manual user marks, you can clear them all afterwards in the menu. And then speaking of our user marks and our lockouts, we actually have a memory quota available here too. Now, basically the idea is here with the R8, you've got 2,000 locations that you're available to store, and it's going to divide them up. Some of those locations are going to be allocated towards your manual GPS lockouts, and the rest are going to be available for your manual user points. You're going to have 2,000 points available total, and you can kind of split them between that. Now, personally, because I don't use the manual marks and I use the GPS lockouts, I want to allocate as much of the memory as possible to the manual GPS lockouts. And the way you do that is you just press the plus and minus like this. So you can see right now I'm adding more to the user marks at the expense of the manual GPS lockouts. And then if I just press the minus button all the way, I just go all the way over here. And the most that I can do is 1750 to our manual GPS lockouts, and then the remaining 250 points to the user marks. You'll also notice that in parentheses it tells me how many manual GPS lockouts I've created, 48, as well as how many manual user marks I have. And then if I want to save that, I can just press the menu button like this to change the quota, and then press it again to save that. Now, actually, speaking of which, if we go back here real quick, remember this delete all user option? We can just press the menu button to do that, and it's going to go ahead and clear those out. You'll notice that it didn't give like any warning or anything. It just immediately cleared them out. Now, if we go back here into the memory quota, you'll see that now it has 250 and then 0 in parentheses. I used to have one user mark, but then I deleted it now here with this option. So that's, again, just going to show you how many manual GPS lockouts you have and how many user marks you have. And then finally, we'll go backwards now through the menu because we're almost done. After the memory quota option, it can tell you the detector's firmware version. So currently I have firmware version 1.25 loaded. The rest tells you other things, what DSP version you've got, but mainly we're typically concerned about what firmware version we have. We've also got the option here to display the detector's GPS database. The database that I currently have loaded in is from October 4th, 2022. And to get the latest GPS database, just like with the firmware, you can grab that off of Uniden's website and just download the file and load it in using Uniden's update software. They also have the ability now to where you can just plug the detector in to the update software. It can automatically go and grab the latest update files for you. I have noticed that sometimes when those update files come out, sometimes they're available first on the website, but they don't actually automatically show up in the update software. So sometimes you do have to kind of manually go and grab those update files yourself if you don't want to just wait for the update software itself to then also get those update files. I've got another video that goes over how to update the detector, how to save your settings to your computer and restore them and that kind of stuff. If you want, I'll link to that video down in the video description, or you can click the button on screen. And then finally, the very last menu option is just to exit the menu. So instead of just waiting for it to time out, you can press the exit button like that and go back out. Though you can always do that same thing at any point in the menu just by pressing and hold the menu button like this, and it's going to go ahead and exit just like before. And so, wow, yeah, that was a lot. That's a run through of all the different settings and menu options available here in the R8. For future reference, again, definitely check out the written article on my website that covers all the same information. It is a lot easier to just kind of maybe jump to a specific option that you need. Additionally, this is with firmware version 1.25, as you saw, and as new features are added, like Bluetooth is activated or laser jammer compatibility is activated, those options are going to show up as well, and I'll keep all that stuff available in the written article, and then I'll have kind of dedicated videos just for those specific updates once they come out. But yeah, with all that said, I guess that's it for now. Check the description for additional links and resources and all the discussion and all that stuff that you need. And so, yeah, wow. Thanks so much for watching. Hope this has been helpful. Hope you guys are doing great, and I'll see you in the next video.